I'm not sure it had that much of an impact on my career, but it had an enormous impact on me. Those of us who were involved there, we'll never forget it. Nothing like this had ever happened. We didn't know what it meant. It was almost like a 9/11. It was not a failure of intelligence, it was a failure of imagination. Nobody could have imagined such a thing could have happened. And I guess what it did for me is sort of kind of underline the frailty and the preciousness of life. And I think, as I think back on it, probably that was when I began to try to cram every single thing I could into every day and kind of live it as if it were my last day. I probably crammed in some things that I shouldn't have, but nevertheless, that was my outlook from then on. And I still think about it and that weekend, and it really had a profound impact on me.
What moment has been the most special to you in covering the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination?
Well, I went back to Dallas. I've been back many times, of course. I grew up in Fort Worth, but I always kind of stop when I go back and see the Texas School Book Depository again and realize what happened that day and how much it changed America. We've never been quite the same since that day. You know, after that, we had been a very confident nation. We believed in our leaders. We believed in our institutions. We took so many things for granted, but that kind of shattered our confidence in a funny kind of way. And from then on, we began to kind of question everything that we had taken for granted before that. It really changed things.
Is there any new information or anything new that you've learned in looking back at the anniversary?
You know, there's not. And I'm not sure what there, I'm sure there are things to know about that we don't know yet. There are still some papers that are still sealed. But I've been through all the conspiracy theories. As far as I'm concerned, Oswald did it. He acted alone. And I've always tried to have an open mind as to whether, you know, someone might have encouraged him or he might have been helped. It may have been, but at this point, no one has ever shown me evidence that I thought was conclusive to say that there was anybody other than Lee Harvey Oswald involved. He was a madman, and sometimes disturbed and deranged people do things that are simply inexplicable. I think one of the hard things for people to sort of process about all this, here was this young, vigorous man who held the most powerful office in the world. And it was hard to believe that someone who'd never succeeded in anything, just a loser, an itinerant, who'd been dishonorably discharged from the military, who had defected to the Soviet Union. It was hard to believe that someone like that could actually bring down someone as powerful as the President of the United States. But I think he did.